Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you today?
Good.
Good. So, will you please tell us your name and share with us anything you want us to know about you so we can get to know you a little bit better?
Sure. I'm Shawn Miller. I'm the director for Duke Learning Innovation, which is a sort of Duke's teaching and learning center plus education technology group plus online learning group all rolled into one. I've been at Duke for about 14 years, which seems crazy to say to me. I didn't think I was going to be at Duke nearly as long. Uh, we came we came from I came from the University of Texas at El Paso. My wife and I grew up in El Paso, Texas, and I got both of my degrees in at UTEP in El Paso. And I live here with my wife in Durham, North Carolina, and my two twin toddlers.
What
And
brought
that's
you what brought you to North Carolina?
a job at Duke. Actually, I was in grad school at UTEP,
Uh-huh.
and so I've been working in higher ed since I was a freshman in college. I got a job at what was then called like a digital media center, right? Like early days of the web, early days of digital media stuff. Every university had something like this where it was like digitizing things, people using Photoshop in the early days of Photoshop, right? Like websites, all that. So I was working as a student developer all through college because I was a first gen college student. So I had to have a job while I went to school, basically, like to support all my other needs that weren't picked up by like financial aid and stuff, right? So um, I worked as a student developer. They asked me to stay on as a regular full time developer when I graduated, and I wasn't ready to go to grad school yet. I always assumed I would go to grad school somewhere else. So I worked there for a while and I started sort of climbing the ranks. And over time, those departments got changed and subsumed by other departments. So at one point we became a teaching and learning center, and I learned a lot more about pedagogy and sort of the ins and outs of how teaching and learning really work. Um, got really interested in working with faculty in those domains as well as the technology stuff. I helped UTEP launch like their first learning management system. A whole bunch of crazy things happened over those years. And then I decided, well, it's been a while. I guess I'll go to grad school here because I could get it paid for. So I went to grad school while I was still working for UTEP full time. And while I was in grad school, I was also teaching some classes. We launched some of UTEP's first hybrid classes, which is funny. It's funny to think about like 14 or 15 years ago, we were doing hybrid classes, and now Duke's asking me like how hybrid works,
You
right?
got again, right?
But so, you know, did that. And you can imagine I was pretty newly married at the time, going to grad school, working full time, teaching classes. I was pretty much non-existent as a husband most of the time, right? So my wife said, I think we went to a party with like my cohort for my PhD course. I was in a PhD program also. So I got a master's degree and I was in a PhD program. And my wife asked me, you know, this summer, would it be weird if like you just looked at what jobs are out there and made a decision about whether you would like continue this program or not? And I was like, actually, it's not that weird. I've been having a lot of sort of internal crises about whether I actually want to be like a faculty member, whether I wanted to be sort of narrowly focused on one thing or just continue what I was doing. And also, you know, the whole academic climb, I was very aware of how that worked. I'd gotten to a place in my career already where I was a manager and I was doing more with people at a higher level. And the thought of being like knocked back down the ladder and having to play the game that unfortunately, you know, just kind of exists in higher ed for faculty, it didn't really appeal to me. And then like getting jerked around the country, like based on like what offers I had.
Right.
So I decided to like take some matters in my own hands and try to find jobs that might progress me elsewhere in my career as like an alt academic person, right? And so I got interviewed at Columbia and Duke, and the people at Duke were awesome.
I love it.
Back then, it was the Center for Instructional
Mhm.
Technology,
I
CIT,
remember.
right? It was Lynn O'Brien's group at the time, and I basically like decided to stop being a manager, come to Duke as just a consultant. They were hiring consultants at the time that worked with different departments, and I worked with social science departments. And we moved without my wife having ever seen North Carolina or Durham. Um, we both decided like it was a good for us in our lives to just get out of El Paso and try something else. We traveled quite a bit, but like never lived anywhere else really. And so we decided we should get out and we should try something else. And we were actually really like, one of the things I guess I should say, since the theme of our chat, right? Like El Paso is this is probably not the right statistic, but it's close to like 85-90% Hispanic. And most of my friends are Latino from El Paso, and I was like sometimes the only white kid in classes and things there. So my wife and I have a different perspective on sort of the way race works. And we were excited to like come to the South because we thought, especially North Carolina, because it seemed very metropolitan, and we were excited about meeting people from many different races and cultures. And I think that has panned out to be true, but it wasn't what I expected, right? I didn't know at the time that like we've spent like the last several years basically like learning about the history of the South and the way race relations work in a way that like I'd never been exposed to growing up in the Southwest Texas, right? Because Southwest Texas, it's really about border relations. It's really about language barriers. It's about a cultural fight between Mexican culture and American culture and how they mesh. It's actually like most of it is really about how much it's blended and how you can't disentangle it, right? But no one really talks about the Black experience or how slavery really worked with the Civil War. I mean, El Paso is so cut off from Texas in a lot of ways that it's not a very southern place. It feels more like Mexico or New Mexico, honestly. And so we weren't exposed to it. And my wife was a teacher for 14, 15 years, K-12, mostly first grade. And she wasn't exposed to it either until she became a teacher in North Carolina. And our experience has been put on its head in many ways, and I think mostly for the better. But I remember coming out to Durham to interview at Duke, and I took a drive around the Triangle just to see what it was like, because I figured even if I didn't get the job, I would check out North Carolina. Right. And I ended up in Raleigh, and I remember walking down by the I guess by City Hall in Raleigh and taking a picture. This is like early. I might have had an iPhone. I don't know if they were out yet. Anyway, on a cell phone or a camera, I took a picture of a statue there for Jen, my wife, like that said in honor, something like in honor of our Confederate dead. Yeah. And I was like, I remember sending her a message saying like, I'm not so sure we want to live here. Like I don't know what this means, right? Like, why do they have a statue here, right? And I think about that a lot because, the last few years with people ripping down statues and stuff, I mean, surely my reaction isn't like, surely more people have that reaction than just me, right? But it was really weird. I was kind of concerned. It's like, are we stepping into something we don't understand and we don't know how to navigate socially, right?
I was born in Brooklyn, New York, but I was raised in a little small town about 27 or so miles from Charleston. And so I grew up in it. I mean, really the thick of it, So where I grew up is what's now called the Low Country. I don't know if they called it that back then, but, more geechee. That was a kind of dialogue that people have. And every once in a while, people say they can still hear the geechee in my voice. But race has always been one of these things that's been perplexing to me because where I went to school, we were integrated by the time I got to middle school. And I can remember every teacher I had telling me I was never going to be anything. I was not going to amount to anything, go have some babies, drop out, go become a domestic or something, I mean, this was constantly being pushed in my head. I was told that Christopher Columbus discovered America. I was told that slavery was good for Black people, and all these things they were taught in school, right?
Yeah.
And I'm sitting here thinking, okay, I guess that's the way it is. And just like you just said, like, what is this place, right? So, and then I got a scholarship to go to school in New York. All my family still was there. So I'm on my way to matriculate through the place. And there are these people with these little tables that they're handing out stuff, back then in college, not like what we have now, all these digital kind of kiosks, but more people standing there with a picnic table with flyers and stuff on it. And a guy, I walked by his desk and he looked at me and I looked at him and I just kept going. He said, "Excuse me." And I turned around and he said, "I work for Coca-Cola and we are trying to bring Negroes into computing." And so I have been called the other N word so often that word comes to me from like, what is that word? What does that word mean? And so I never made it to school. I never got there. I just went with the job. And I think that the best way I would describe race in the North is covert and the South is overt. And that's really, it's almost 100% that way. There are some things in the North, you see racism in little ways, but they're more subtle, right? They're not so directed in your face. So you're not going to have somebody screaming white power at you as you're driving down the street in Manhattan or Chicago or wherever you are. That's not really going to happen.
Right.
So so there's, I don't know if you saw on the news today, but Asheville, North Carolina has decided to pay all their residents reparations.
Yeah, I did see that.
Yeah, and as I read that, I kind of took a step back. I'm like, really? Is that really how we're going to do it? City by city, town by town? Is that the way it's going to be? And so the purpose for me for doing these chats was to hear other people's thoughts so I wouldn't be stuck in my own head with this, right? So when Mr. Floyd was killed, like, it wasn't like new or phenomenal for me because we had seen so many Black men and women killed for years. Now it's just people have cell phones and ways to record and copy these images or something so you can hear what's been happening so much in the dark. So it's not finally coming to the light. So what I hope these conversations do for me and for anybody else that listens to them is to hear a different perspective. Because I think what you said earlier about, going to a school that's predominantly Hispanic, that's a different kind of minority, right? So, and the same thing happened in Miami when I worked in Miami in the 80s, and they had the same thing. So we just had the Mariel boat lift. All the Cubans were coming into Miami. There were already some there, but they were coming. And there were these constant challenges about what the language was going to be, right? Or, how things were going to be, in the city. Cocaine was still a very highly valued thing for people to do. So Miami was a really strange continent, because like when I do mean continent, because like it's off on its own little thing, right? So you have people there that are very, very successful, rich, powerful, white, Jewish, those kind of things. So you have Cubans, and then you have everybody else, right? So hate people from Haiti, Black people, all this melting pot of people in this space that describes exactly what you experienced, where you would go to a school and nobody was in the school but Cubans or Haitians or whatever. And so that kind of minority experience is really a very strong sentiment when it happens to a white person, like when you're the minority. For us, we were used to being the minority, but for you to be the minority, how did you adjust to that? Did you find yourself feeling uncomfortable, or were you in a space where you were okay and you thought, well, this is no big deal, I got this?
I think, when I was younger, growing up, kids don't always have a very good sense of race until someone sort of points it out, right? And I definitely had it pointed out by some people when I was younger that I was maybe the odd person out, which is so strange to say, right? But as I got older, I mean, I think I can't remember any instances of being sort of othered or set aside, other than in El Paso, if someone, if you're rejected somehow by Latinos, it's more like they'll start speaking Spanish in front of you, right? And assume that you don't know how to speak Spanish. But because I grew up with so many friends that were Latino, I was mostly, I think my wife and I both have had experiences where we felt like we were adopted by different families because of the way the culture works there. And it's something about Mexican culture that just works that way. But I I can't separate that feeling anymore, right? So anything negative that had happened to me earlier in life in that way, I chalk it up more to like kids being ugly, and but I don't have any like standout memories anymore necessarily, right? Almost every white person in El Paso has complained about someone speaking Spanish in front of them, and that used to be such a big deal. I mean, I have a different perspective on it than some people, right? But that's about the size of it, I think. I had another thought there, but I lost it.
It'll come back, believe me.
Yeah,
That's called senioritis. I have that very
yeah.
bad.
It's usually called like lack of sleep. Like
Uh,
the girls were up last night, and yeah.
yeah. So, did you see the video of Mr. Floyd's death?
I did. I had a weird experience with that because we were talking earlier outside of this recording about how much work we're doing here at Duke for the COVID responses and all that. And so my life is kind of like in these waves of we're working 8-10 hours, with some breaks to take care of our families and stuff. And then like maybe I'll take in the news a little bit, or I'll see something on Twitter. And so um, George Floyd's death, I only noticed it as a trickle on Twitter at first, right? Like, and I noticed that people were talking about this incident that had happened, but I didn't have time to stop and see what it was about. And then finally, when I did, my wife and I finally saw it all. We watched the video as many times as we could stand to.
Yeah.
And I was like, just like most people, like horrified, devastated, just shocked. Although, like, honestly, and I'm sure many people, I think many people probably feel this way. I feel numb to it because I was skeptical that like anything would change because of it.
Yeah.
Right. And so that was like one of my first thoughts after seeing it a few times and after getting over the initial sort of emotion of it and just like shock is like, I feel like the last few years we've it's good and a bad thing that we've seen more because it's been exposed more, right?
Yeah.
But I feel like we've been exposed to enough already to like instill some sort of change. And I like, would this do it, right? I was a little bit in the weeks that followed that, I was a little bit encouraged that it seemed like something different was happening.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure if that's been your experience as well.
I'm hopeful, but I tell people this all the time. I vacillate between pessimistic and optimistic in the exact same moment. In one moment I'm perfectly fine. I have hope for the future, and then the other side I'm not, because Mr. Floyd was killed on May 25th, and 3 weeks later, another Black man was killed in Atlanta for sleeping at a fast food restaurant.
Right.
And so will things change? And now the political climate that we have, it seems so adversarial and not having the interests of the common people. Like it's just, I want to one up you. I want to be better than you. I want to tell you what I can do better. But I don't see how that promotes or advances humanity, because certainly you're a white man, I'm a Black woman. Do I owe you deference? Should I be docile? Should I not tell you what I think? How should I be in the space of that way? And that's the battle that most Black people have every single day, even working at Duke or working in a job where more times than not your supervisor is going to be a white man, maybe a white woman every once in a while, but very rarely do you get these places where there's a place where you feel comfortable to be outspoken. Like if you guys were doing an instructional guide for a faculty member, and the faculty member was being, sort of obnoxious, I mean, if you called him on that, it's the right thing to do.
Right.
But if I call him on that, I'm not staying in my place.
Right.
And so that's what my experience has been about Mr. Floyd. And I don't see that changing because, like I told you before we started this recording, on Tuesday, Duke did something to me that is beyond, I can't even wrap my mind around it. My head is still spinning for it. And why was I so vulnerable that this could happen to me had I not made a difference in my community. And I know that at Duke, I know I did. I know what I did. I know what I contributed to them. And then it is. So, I mean, I think that for a Black person, there's so many layers of this that is trying to peel the onion back one layer at a time. And after a while, you start crying and you can't do anymore because it's just too much.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
I worry that George Floyd's the sort of the outrage and the energy around change is, I don't know how like the COVID-19 situation affects it, right? I've thought about, would it have more impact if we weren't all in the middle of this, or is it better because people are at home and they have to think about things for a while and they actually have to, like,
say that one. I heard a lot of
right?
people say the latter.
But I agree. I think one thing I've learned, I internalized recently with a lot of the conversations I've listened to, is that what white people have to do more work and stop relying on our Black colleagues to do all the work of educating everyone, right? And that's a big lift, but we should do it. But I had never really internalized that. Like, my knee-jerk reaction whenever people ask me about race is to find one of my Black friends or colleagues to, like, inform me on things as well, right? And I rapidly learning that I should take more responsibility for that myself. Not necessarily answering for Black people and Black culture, but informing people, right? And the last few years I have spent some time trying to at least talk our pieces of our family into thinking a different way, which is not going so well, right? Like, my wife and I both grew up, like I said before, like basically poor white kids, right? And we're first gen college students, so a lot of what we say to our families gets chalked up as like liberal college thought, right? Not grounded in some sort of grassroots reality sort of thing. I remember having like the white fragility conversation with someone in my family, and it didn't go so well. Right?
Didn't turn out the way you thought it was going to turn out.
No, I mean, us explaining white privilege to someone who's been poor most of their life, it's hard for them to get their head around it. But like, they don't understand that that's like, there's other things that haven't been done to them, right? Like, even if you point those out, but I am seeing like those things are cracking though. I think people are starting to accept that that's real, that haven't accepted it before, right? And I think if there's any positive thing that I've noticed, it's that move. And I don't know if that's enough to instill like a lasting change, but I think it's more than a start, and it's more than what's happened before.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of that too is, people think, well, they're taking down statues, they're renaming teams and things that were offensive. The pieces that I struggle with all of that is like, I think all those are great advances. But if you look back historically, so we had the Emancipation Proclamation. That was an amazing thing, right? So slaves were finally free, if you could use that word, right? So there's that was a great thing happened. It took a war, a lot of people died, but something good happened, right? At least we hope. And then you get to Reconstruction, and that's just like a moment in time, because that was undermined. You get to Brown versus the Board of Education, where you get to integration. And then you have Tulsa, where the Black Wall Street, these people were successful in their own space. They weren't asking anybody for anything. And there was so much visceral response to them being self-sufficient that they burned down the town and killed half the people that lived there. So, that's why I said it's kind of hard to think about this in a way. I'm so glad that the protests are more diverse. There's black, brown, white, orange, yellow, and every other color protesting now. We get these mails from people all over the world saying your rights gave us our rights. So if Black people hadn't had to go through all this, Asian Americans, Hispanic Americans, Latin Americans, whatever the group is, would not have the rights that they have. right? So we are kind of in this place where we have had to carry the bulk of this on our shoulders and on our backs, but yet it's still other people benefit for it from it. And then when we are in this space, where's the person that comes to help me? Where's the person that's going to come save me? And it's just one of those things where, like, in a lot of ways, I think what you said earlier about having a conversation with your family, I think that's the challenge that lies before us, right? So you are their child, you are their family, you are their loved one, you are their, everything. And you have a conversation with them and, it's rejected like this doesn't make any sense. So like the people with the mask things, right? So why wouldn't you wear a mask? Even if you believe it was a hoax, why wouldn't you just wear one just to make sure, just in case? Because you got old parents, young children, you got all, why wouldn't you wear one but some people believe so fervently that this is not a real thing, that I didn't have any slaves. My ancestors did that, but did you benefit from it? That's always the question. Did you benefit from whatever your ancestors had? And when you describe yourself, maybe not your family. I don't know, but white society as a whole has benefited from the backs of slaves. They've benefited from free labor, the things that make this country great. I don't know if you're a historian buff, but I love history. And I watch all these shows about how America became America, right? So the great titans, Carnegie, DuPont, all these great people who had made all these advances, but they would not have made them if they had not already gotten rich from other things. So to be able to make those advances. So there's that. Okay, because I know we got to go. So let me ask you this. So what do you think of when you hear Black Lives Matter? What comes to mind?
What comes to mind now is that I think I want that movement to continue, but I want it to be more than a movement, I guess. I think it was dismissed when it was first started by a lot of white people as just like the way it gets spun by like current administration, right? But it was dismissed in softer ways by a lot of white people, where it was like, well, this is a movement for Black people, and we can support it, but we shouldn't be a part of it. But now, like you've said, the protests are more diverse, and people are standing up, and a lot of us white people are taking a stand as well and trying to make change. So I hope that continues, and I hope that if that's the banner that happens under, that's fine. But I think it needs to be more than a movement. Like I keep thinking about, like you're saying, like take down some statues. I think that's people grasping at like wanting to make real change, right? But so they need to do something physical. It's like build a building, tear a building down, right? But what are the other things we can do to make really lasting change? And I think I told you, I don't publicly talk about this a lot, but my twins are adopted, and they're both Black. And so my wife and I think a lot about, we're watching all of this happen this year, and we're thinking a lot about, I mean, my twins are toddlers, right? So they've got ways to go, but will they experience the same sort of issues with race that you experienced when you were 5 or 6 years old, 7 years old? When they get to college age, will they experience the same things that people are experiencing today? Right? I don't want them to, right? I want us to be in a way better place by then.
Yeah.
And we're definitely, all of our energy is motivated by that kind of goal. But we also, like, this is the reason we're talking to our families about white fragility and things too, right? Because we don't want our families to somehow soften or deafen like the reality that these girls need to know and experience, right, growing up.
But can I ask you a question about that?
Yeah.
Yes. So will you have a conversation with your children about their safety when they're out and about in the world? So will you have that conversation? So like most Black families have this conversation with their kids, like what happens when you're out in public, so like if you see the blue lights of a police car in your back window, what are you going to do? Are you going to have that conversation with them, or you don't think?
Yeah, absolutely. I like, it's not about whether I think all police can be trusted or not. It's about the reality of like our culture right now, and the way that these things happen, and I absolutely believe like they have to be careful, and they have to take that into consideration. I just for their own safety, right? Like I don't see the world changing enough by the time that they're older and on their own. I hope it does, but I don't think so, and I think they need to be careful and not just assume that like they're not going to be treated differently, right?
But how
Um,
how do you guard against that? How do you give them the tools that they need in order to actually be in that space? How do you, what is it that you have to give them so that one, your family, because these are their children, grandchildren, nieces and nephews too, regardless of how they became their nieces and nephews, they're yours. I mean, how do you prepare for that?
yeah, I mean, it's like, I mean, we don't live, um, for one thing, we don't live near our family, so most of our family is made up of friends here, right? We're we live basically alone here in Durham, so we're we have to commit, I think, first to making our community and our friends be as diverse as possible, um, which is not as hard as it sounds in Durham, but like it's still a challenge, and I think I still have to be purposeful about it too, right?
Yep.
Um, and I think people of different races tend to like float towards each other. You have to be purposeful and thoughtful about how you make connections with people that are different from you, and it's like it's not as easy, but it's not impossible, right? And I've been thinking about this a lot too, because I've been thinking about hiring practices and things too, and how to like make a dent in changing the demographic of like my organization at Duke, right? Like it just we do all the things that we're supposed to do to try to get diverse candidates, right? But we don't. How do we go further? Like I'm not sure. The answer is I'm not sure, but I think it's going to take us like reaching out to communities that maybe Duke doesn't think about reaching out to say we have opportunities, right? Like opportunities are really part of the game that gets played. Like white people have more opportunities, right? That's the way it works. So if we can put more opportunities in front of Black people and other people of color, then like we should.
Yeah.
But it's finding out how to do that.
So
Um,
when Lynn retired, I told her I was going to apply for her job, and I did. And I think you guys hired the guy from Carolina. He was somewhere at UNC. I don't remember where he was, but
mhm,
from
mhm,
UNC. And I'll never forget the conversation I had with HR about that experience. I can't remember who was heading the search committee, but he said to me when they granted me an interview. Um, and he said to me just privately, he and I were walking. He said, you're not going to get this job, right? And I said, why not? Because we couldn't do that. He said we couldn't do this for this department. We could not have a person of color leading instructional education for faculty for a person of color. He said that to me, and I that's been said to me before, so I didn't take anything of it. But one of the things I told him, CIT at the time was the whitest organization at Duke besides Nicholas. Those were the two. I mean, there was so little color in CIT and so little color at Nicholas, and Duke is always talking about diversity. But why
mhm.
isn't it not diversity? Why are you having such a hard time bringing in Black and brown people and promoting them and giving them opportunities? And I have never gotten a good response to that. But I hope you find a way to work through that for your kids' sake, not for Duke, but for your kids' sake. Because if they can discriminate against me, you can imagine what could happen to them.
Right, right. I'm very concerned about those things, of
Yeah,
course, right?
yeah.
Um, yeah, it's going to be a continuing challenge. I mean, it means my wife and I have to stay like overeducated on all these things as well. But I mean, I think it's really kind of everyone's job to do that, regardless. But
I agree with you.
definitely been putting in the time.
Yeah. So we have about 4 minutes. I leave them all to you to say whatever you wish to say.
Did I not? I don't even know if we got to all of your questions, but I
Um,
might have derailed us a little bit. I'm not sure.
I think I think we got to most of what we needed to get to. So I'm happy for you to talk about whatever you wish to talk about. I mean, this is a learning process for all of us. And one of the things I have learned that these conversations have helped so many people. So I'm glad that they're there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's other things I guess we're professionally interested in too that touch on some of these issues, like inclusive teaching practices are a really big deal to us. Just changing sort of the learning landscape, thinking about, I mean, I think it starts with like student-centered learning as being a shift that's been happening for several years, but student-centered learning also takes into account who those students are and how their backgrounds may be different and the way they approach things may be different. There's so many like things that have changed because of the COVID-19 situation that I hope stay part of a conversation past COVID-19. Like we've had a lot of conversations about assessment and how formative and how summative assessments don't work for a lot of people, and they're actually, you know what I mean? That whole conversation. And I think it's like, again, that's like, it's cracked, that foundation in that conversation is cracked open, and then now we can start talking about it again. But I hope if we get through the pandemic, that conversation doesn't fade away, because it's a conversation that needs to happen anyway. We need to see sort of a revolution in the way assessment's handled, the way people approach designing classes. I personally think like online learning can be a great way to equalize a situation or give people more opportunity. But as you know, like there's such a huge downside, and as far as like people with access to technology, access to bandwidth, access to spaces, food, like all sorts of issues there. So like the conversations swirling about online learning are really like impacting my life a lot right now too. I don't know, there's so many things I've been thinking along these issues that I hope we come out on the other end of the pandemic at least making some changes that are positive.
I hope I hope so too. I hope you're right, and I hope that you know, as we get to these next levels of whatever these things mean, you know, we find commonality. And I think it's about having a relationship, and I think that that's really the key. You know, so can you have a relationship, and I'm not asking this a rhetorical question, but can you have a relationship with a Black person the same you have with a white person? So, you know, those offhand jokes you make, you know, that nobody really takes seriously when you're with your own kind. They call that homosocial reproduction, but you know, I prefer to be with people who are like me. That concept flies in the face of everything that is America.
Yeah.
So I'm really grateful you took the time to talk to me. I appreciate this very much.
Yeah, I
And
really appreciate it.
yeah, and let me know how you do. I really want to hear, you know, some of the thoughts that you have about, you know, parenting and how you deal with some of the pieces and parts. And if I can help you, you know, just email or call or
Yeah,
text something.
I'll definitely reach out. I think we need all the help we can get. Yeah.
Happy to help. So, you know, if you need me, you know where to find me. So once the video converts, I'll send you a copy. You can look at it and tell me if I can upload it, or you want to do it over or not do it at all.
Okay.
Thank you
Okay.
so much, Shawn. Have a
Great.
good day.
Thanks, Rochelle. You too.
Bye.
Bye.